Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Jason.
With me today is life coach and LOA teacher Joel Elston.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. So welcome to No Theme Monday. That's the theme for today because we have no idea what the theme is. And the funny thing is that even when we don't have a theme, we still end up with one. We just don't know in advance what it's going to be, which makes it a fun kind of challenge, and a little bit of a surprise for us, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things. I'm always shocked when we have no theme that we end up with a theme, and it's usually a pretty good show when we do that. So, we'll just sort of start talking, and we'll see what happens with our theme.
And you and I were just talking about this project I've been working on called AI Gather. It's an AI, basically a chat room, a team of AI working together. It's what built. I've been telling people listening to the podcast. It built an app for the gardening service. It's built a second app that basically is able to search out and evaluate different startup business ideas for people who are looking to evaluate a business idea. So that's just the first couple of projects it's done. And I passed it along to my sister-in-law who's doing the alpha testing on it. And she and I were looking at it yesterday, along with my brother, Mark, who is a software developer at NASA and knows a little bit about software himself. And they were telling me they like it too. So it's kind of an exciting thing. But then you mentioned something while I was telling you about this. You said we just keep taking steps forward. And I love that because that's a very grounded thought. Because when things seem like they could be working, that's when we can kind of get ourselves out of whack. Like, oh my God, what if this wonderful thing could happen? And why can't it happen sooner and so forth? And really, all you can do is just keep taking the steps. And if you focus on taking the steps, you're going to get there.
Well, the fundamental part of my coaching that when it comes to an action plan is I break everything down into whatever that next step is. And the concept of the book Atomic Habits is a big influence in my life. If you've never, I know you have, but if other people haven't read that, I think it's a wonderful book to understand the value of incremental, tiny changes and how they can affect gigantic changes in your life. So one of the reasons I said that when we were talking about the project, and I'm very excited for you. I think this is going somewhere, but that's why I kept saying, just okay, what's the next step? Just it's great to have the win, but what happens sometimes with people who get in one of these things is like, okay, what's the next step? Is we're always asked the question. It's not that I'm minimalizing the big discovery you're at, but that's always the next question that I ask everybody is like, what is the next step? Because we got to get our mind focused on that. If we're going to bring a product or a concept or complete a goal, there always needs to be until the goal is complete. What is the next step? Is for the biggest thing in our mind. So that's just a strategy by default. I always ask people that when they tell me they're doing something like you're doing.
And practically speaking, that does make a lot of sense.
Yes.
Just exploring what that next step is. It also makes sense from a vibrational perspective. I just realized this as you were describing it. Because from a vibrational, what's the whole idea with vibration? With vibration, we're trying to reach and maintain a high level of vibration, a good feeling vibration. And we're trying to do that regularly throughout our day. Well, when you have a breakthrough moment, you have a moment of, whoa, that's a high vibration. But it's also easy to lose the moment. I mean, the next day you're not feeling the same vibration, right? So you need something to keep it going. Well, as it turns out, focusing on the next step, the only way you can really focus on the next step when you just had a peak moment is to stay in the peak moment. You'll lose the focus if you don't do that.
You just sort of decipher the code without, the why I believe that. There's a lot of people that'll have the concept say, Joel, just let me enjoy this win. Let me just enjoy this. And I'm like, I want you to. But the mindset that has you excited right now, the next step can be powered with that energy if we get to that next step. If we
and it reinforces it too. That's what I was thinking. It also reinforces the energy.
Yes. And so that's the important piece to understand is we were talking about the same thing before the show, and I use wins bring wins vibrationally. So you get something going, you feel great about it. You're very excited about the project. You've been working very hard on this project. So the tendency for human beings sometimes is to just, okay, well, that was great. I can't wait to what the next step, but energizing that next plan of action with the energy or the vibration of where you're at, it compounds its effectiveness is my belief. It's just, I'm always about implementation and what's next. I don't ever get 5 steps ahead, they're 5 steps ahead are useless. But once you complete that next step, the very most important thing you do with the energy of that completion is to establish and begin whatever that next step is.
And I will throw in a little bit of a, not so much a, it's not a contradiction at all. It's more like a sort of a reminder step. Immediately after you've had that big breakthrough, there's almost like an energetic, like a release. And like you need a break at that point because you've been pushing so hard to get to that point. You finally had like, oh wow, I gotta have a breath here. So you gotta take the breath. And then that's after you've taken the breath and you've calmed and you're able to feel, not only the enjoyment of it, but also you can feel more relaxed. That's the time to work on the next step.
Yes. And that the momentum, whatever you want to call this, the vibration of winning or moving forward, it's energized. A lot of people will get to they call it a plateau. So
Mhm.
they get to where you're at, and they're going to just say, "Wow, that was hard." And
Yeah.
instead of that breath, they're going to say, "Well, I'm taking a few weeks off. Let's get back. Let's circle back to this, whatever." And again, I'm saying what works for high performers, and if you want to get things accomplished, is the this wasn't our goal. Last year. I'm a big college football fan, and Indiana had a big year last year, surprised everybody, went on to win the national championship, and every game along the way of the playoffs, everybody was expecting them to lose because they just were. This is a team that never has ever been anything. Also, they're contending against the best teams in college football, and so the coach one day, they had this gigantic last second win. It did very improbable last second win. He won. And everybody's freaking out, and he goes to the locker room, and I mean, gets to the podium to talk, and he goes, "Everybody, what an exciting win!" He goes, "That's what we came here to do. We came here to win." Now we the big the big game, the next game is the only game that matters. And it wasn't that he was trying to quell that momentum, but it was just simply understanding the role, understanding what we're trying to do with it. And you this applies to so much in life. Whether you want to lose, somebody wants to lose 100 pounds, that seems underwhelming, but I guarantee you a way to tell you weight is a couple pounds this week or two in 2 weeks for sure. I can tell you to do that. So the idea that whatever we got going, whatever is that next step, what is that next process, and not being overwhelmed with the enormity of it all, but it's also just saying, everything has a way to do it. And my goal in working with people in my personal life as well is what is the most micro step that is my next step. I don't need gigantic wins. I can look at it and say, "Oh, well, this is really important. I did this," but not until this is done. There's always that thing. You got to get that next step. So I just think the momentum in life it applies on a much greater scale than software development or even it's just what is next, and that's important.
It is important. I think there's also perhaps a misconception that looking at the next step, like you kind of alluded to indirectly, there's some people who see focusing on taking the next step as being a way to dismiss the fact that you just had a breakthrough.
Right.
And the fact is, they actually go together. They're
Oh
they're
yeah.
they're two sides of the same coin in a sense. In that, if you have the great event happen, you do want to celebrate it. You want to celebrate it loud and long. You want it to really like milk it for everything that you can. And one of the reasons you want to do that is because it helps you to take that next step, to figure out what the next step is, and then take it. And not only take it enthusiastic, take it broadly, take it boldly. Like,
Yes.
not just a little step. Like, let's take the step. Let's take the real big step here.
Yeah, and that's life. Being able to the we pretty much live the life we expect we're going to live, and then when you have wins along the way, you believe I can live a bigger life, I can live a more successful life. But it isn't until you achieve those steps along the way, and then you start practicing that whole concept, the law of action, the next step. Today we're recording this on August 17th, and today is 31 years since I've been in recovery. 31 years ago today, I was sitting on my little bench down in Florida deciding whether I wanted to do this or not, and the overwhelming crazy idea of being able to get my life back after I destroyed absolutely everything, it seemed impossible. There was no path I could imagine. But I, even then, without the knowledge I have today, obviously knew whatever whatever the next step was, and I was very limited in what the next step could possibly be. So that I consider that a gift. I didn't have a lot of choices, so I took the only choice I had, and I took a job at a restaurant and I began the process. And it was just, and that energized more things and energized more things. And then it just is somewhere along the way, it became an overwhelming momentum that it feels like I wasn't even in control of.
And in some ways, you felt out of control because, as I recall, that particular day was a day where you were not just trying to, contemplate what your next step is, but did you want to take another step at all? I mean, you were
Well, that
literally,
that was
literally
that
saying,
was
do
the
I still want to stay here?
yeah, that was the decision.
Yeah.
Is it I created such a hole, it was overwhelming, and I had no evidence to that point that I was capable of getting out of this hole. The hole included my family had cut me off. The I was facing, I knew I would be charged with felony criminal charges for stealing from my previous company. My credit was ruined. My friendships were destroyed. I'd taken advantage of everybody, and again, not excusing him, but it was because of a bad gambling addiction.
Mm.
And so I couldn't imagine the steps involved. It's like every people would just sort of politely say, "Oh, don't worry, everything will be fine." I'm going, "What? No, no, it won't. It's there. There's no path that I could imagine." But I also realized I wasn't going to be able to comprehend a path, but I could only do that next step. The next
Okay.
step was I secured a place to live, and then I went to work at a restaurant. That's all I knew what to do, and I never waited a table a day of my life. I lied and got the job, and I did pretty good at it. And then that led to other things, which led to other things, and then the momentum it drastically took off. But that first step was just it was just doing what was available. And it wasn't, I didn't believe it was going to work out. There was not a path. And I don't want to make it sound like, oh my goodness, I made that decision and things got good immediately. It did not. It was hard for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the part that, particularly when we hear success stories, we tend to skip over. I think it was Will Smith who said that it took 12 years for him to become an overnight success, which I
Yes.
thought was a good way to describe it. But when you're in the midst of that, it doesn't feel like you're making any progress at all.
Well,
You're taking steps, but they don't seem to be
no,
leading anywhere. They don't seem to be producing any results, so you're not really sure.
right. And that process, all of that, all the steps I was taking, I couldn't even see a pathway where it would make sense. But as I was charged with a felony, I was convicted of that felony,
Mm,
so I was very limited in the jobs that I could even get.
right.
So the idea that any the only two jobs I had before that, I was worked for my dad as an insurance agent, which I hated with a passion. And then I ran group homes for emotionally handicapped kids, and both require licensure and clean background checks. So I was disqualified from either of the fields that I even knew. So I didn't know where that was going to go.
Yeah, right. And when you're facing that, it seems insurmountable. That's what makes taking that first step so difficult. And yet
Yes.
you took the step and you took a series of steps. And at some point, I'm not sure exactly where it is in your story, in your timeline, but at some point you actually reached a point where you had a step that led to something really big, or at least a lot bigger than what you've been dealing with. And that was a new experience. And I want to touch on the new experience part for a moment. Like right now, I'm dealing with the new experience of I've developed a software product that I'm pretty sure is going to be in demand and it has a very, very good chance of taking off. But I don't really know what that's like. I mean, I've done other stuff in the tech world, don't get me wrong, but I've never actually had a software product that was about to, take off like that. And it's a little bit daunting. I mean, it's a little bit like, wow, I wonder what this is going to be like. That's the thought, right? There's the doubt, there's also the encouragement, all going on, kind of mixed together at the same time. And I'm sure you encountered that same feeling. Now, somehow, in the midst of having that kind of experience, you still have to take the next step. But it's almost, I mean, it's hard enough to take a first step or a next step when you're at the worst place, which is where you were at 31 years ago today.
Yes.
But it's also hard to do it when you're up against, here's something new that could potentially be very good, and I've never been here before, and I'm not quite sure how to feel about it or what to do about it. It's just what do I do with this new thing?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I often said I had the gift of no choices or one choice in the beginning. It was easier to decide when the only thing in front of me was getting a job at a restaurant. That was the only thing in front of me. So
Mm,
getting a job at a restaurant that starts with immediate pay. You can get tipped out. That cured my immediate problem for right then. So that was a victory, a win.
mhm,
And so, as we said, when you haven't had wins, in my case, I hadn't had wins for years. So having that first win felt a little awkward that I was even winning. It's like,
mhm,
well, I won that one. And so then doing the other steps that come along, getting back in the gym, trying to get these things going and just trying to not gamble. That seems so silly, but when you're a compulsive gambler, that's a really hard thing not to do when you have some money on you. So I kept forward, and all of this along the way kept getting. There were some bigger steps. In fact, the steps that scared me, you required me to leave Florida and go to South Carolina. Uh, that was a very hard decision, but it didn't really have much of a choice because that's where my business partner at that point ended up in business with my the guy that I went to treatment with that owned the facility, and we wanted to open up a treatment center in South Carolina. Well, I lived
mhm,
my entire life in Florida, so the idea of me leaving Florida to go to South Carolina seemed ridiculous.
mm.
The beaches of South Carolina or the city of Rock Hill, the beaches of Florida or the city of Rock Hill in South Carolina. It's not, just
There's not much of a comparison going on there. No.
no. And I grew to love Rock Hill, but I never compared it to Anna Maria Island in Florida. I never
Right.
compared it in that way. But what took place in South Carolina opened up a bunch of brand new doors, and I started gaining momentum and respect back, and that led to me ending up in Virginia with a very lucrative position, which eventually led me to being in my private practice, which was sort of the none of this even seemed plausible. And you and I talk about this. It seems improbable that this could even happen the way it happened.
Well, isn't that the way it is with most of these things that we encounter for the first time? It seems improbable. I mean, here we are. Yeah, it's right there in front of us. But there's also the little piece of us that they often there's the current term for it. The current term is imposter syndrome.
Yes.
I feel like I'm an imposter in this role at the moment. Never mind the fact that I actually earned getting here. Never mind the fact that, yeah, it's right in front of me. You still feel like the imposter. And you're kind of dealing with that, especially given what you went through, because you like you were describing, you didn't have the credentials that you need in order to get the right next job, and yet here were the opportunities coming to you. It's almost like your credentials were the stuff that you went through.
That I jokingly say my one of the worst days of my life was when I was actually convicted of a felony, and that turned out to be one of my best credentials, the
Yeah.
felony conviction. it's I literally came back from a felony conviction, which is that's rare.
Oh yeah.
To take to get back in a field or almost create my own field that it didn't really I didn't understand it all the time, but that is what made me relate to so many of my clients. That most people say, well, yeah, therapists, they read that in the book, but you literally did the things you're telling us we need to do. So it has more credibility, and it's coming from a place of if this guy can do it, I can do it concept, and I encourage that thought. It's like, yeah, I was clueless, had no idea. I don't even understand to this day how it all worked out. It just worked out. Here's what I did.
And it's astonishing too, all the different stories you've told, because you've told a lot of stories over the years here on the podcast of people you've worked with, often young boys, but just in general, people you've worked with who had their own thing going on. It was a really bad thing going on. And inevitably, they ended up at a point saying something to the effect of, how would you know what it's like to go through this?
Yes.
And you could say, oh, well,
Yeah, that's come up several times, and that people that think, well, this is I don't know how anybody could overcome this, and how you wouldn't know because you're just a therapist or life coach or whatever, you wouldn't know. And I said, well, sort of, if you know the whole story now, you can understand. I'm not saying your situation isn't serious,
Mm.
but the idea that if you're asking me if I can relate and believe anything can be overcome, I believe it can, and that's a belief system that I hold with every client that walks in the door. there's always something. There's always a path. There's always going to be a path. Our goal is to find it, move forward with it, and implement these, what I call foolproof steps to, by breaking it down to the incremental steps and moving forward. This system never fails. Most people have a hard time keeping it broke down in the steps and just doing whatever the next thing is.
Right. Well, basically, that's because they're having trouble with the idea of just looking at the next step. That kind
Yes.
of refers back to what we talked about earlier. It's after a while you start to see, like you said, 5 steps ahead. Problem is you can't take 5 steps at once. You can only take the
Yeah.
first step.
Yeah. In fact, often the fifth step ahead is nothing that doesn't seem plausible when
Mm.
you're at 5 steps behind. So one thing leads to another, which leads to another. You take an action that puts you in position to see another action. So when I break down a plan of what the next step is, we might have an end goal, but the most of the goals in mid it's impossible to determine what they are because they will present themselves when the time is right. But your fifth step is not going to appear or even be on the horizon likely until you've done your fourth step.
And isn't it also true? I mean, you would know this from your own personal experience, but also from working with your clients. I kind of infer it just because I've had it in my own life a couple times. But isn't it also true that when you look ahead and you're trying to visualize that fifth step, when you finally get to the fifth step, it's not what you thought it was. In fact, it's often something very different from what you thought the fifth step was going
Oh
to
yeah.
be.
Yeah, that's sort of the point. You never know what the answer is. You never. So when I was sitting on Anna Maria Island and things were going, I was there for a few years. I was managing the facility that I was once a patient of. I got a certification to work with compulsive gamblers. So we started treating compulsive gamblers. Now that still isn't a really lucrative deal
Mm.
because gamblers in general don't have any money, so we had a hard time finding paying customers. So I was my assumption was the next step was for me to get another job outside of this and make a lot of money. I looked at, what sales job, because I would be good at sales. There's a lot of things I could do. So what's the most money I could make with just being a money focus? So I was applying for a bunch of jobs. It was still within the 5-year window of my felony. And why that matters is most companies will not even consider talking to you if your felony is less than 5 years old. So, and mine was for theft. So, I mean, I didn't hurt anybody or anything nonetheless, but it was just embezzlement or theft. But still, it's a felony, and nobody wants to hire that. So I was limited in what I could get, and so this is when the twist came. So South Carolina was doing video poker, was taking over. There's a lot of problems. So the state of South Carolina asked us to come open a facility up there, and that's when my business partner named Rick said, "I need you to go up there and run that facility." And I didn't want to. I didn't want to leave beautiful Anna Maria Island, but it was my comfort zone. It was where I've always been, and
Mm.
this isn't a lucrative business. I'm like Rick. And I was left with not much other choice but to go. And I was resentful at first. Didn't like it. It was. We went up. I'm trying to think of when I got up there, but it was in my mind. It was gray, always gray, and it's this middle of nowhere, South Carolina. I just had such a negative dialogue that it was like okay, but so I get settled in. We start working with people, and then all of a sudden I realized I got to join a gym because me, I got to have a gym.
Oh yeah.
And so there's a really good gym not far from the house. So we joined the gym. I start making friends. And before I knew it, I'm sort of fitting in at the gym. That led to then we started making a little money because we're getting some clients and things led to the other thing. So the everything led to the next thing. So, and the point of telling the story, at step one, getting a job at the restaurant was all that was in front of me. There is no point in that original concept was me running a treatment center in South Carolina on that list of steps. It just that did not happen until it was ready to happen.
Yeah, you couldn't have projected that was not going to be step 5 or step 2 or step
Yeah,
7. I
yeah,
mean, it wasn't even on the horizon.
yeah. So
It wasn't a
so
possibility.
yeah, all of those things that we looked at, it's like okay, so I you can't get way down the road, and so my comfort zone was my biggest enemy when I was in Florida. When Rick says I need you to go to South Carolina, I didn't want to go. It was not a good idea. in my mind, but I left with no choice, and I thought I had no choice. And then I get there and slowly fall in love with South Carolina and the people there. And I start doing a lot of work, volunteering with foster care. That led to a whole bunch of stuff, and so I sort of like got respect back, and I was respected in the community. I was running a respected treatment center. I had social workers that were talking to me about their clients in the foster care
Mm,
industry. It's an industry, unfortunately, but they were, I was an advocate for kids, even though I was, again, convicted felon, but I was not working with the kids, but I was very much advocating for the kids and the training of foster care parents, which led to me eventually adopting a child. It's just so
mm.
many things happen. And none of those steps are, as I described them, going back to, 31 years ago today, when I sat on the bench and decided not to kill myself, that those weren't plausible steps that I ever thought would occur. You couldn't imagine them. So the action that we take puts us in front of the next action, and the action is something that is almost never what you think it would be.
I was just realizing too, as you've referred twice now to your life in Florida as your comfort zone. That's a topic we've talked about quite a bit here on the show over the years. And one of the things we focused on is how comfort zones are usually not all that comfortable. In fact, they're pretty uncomfortable. Yours was actually comfortable. I mean, it also had a discomfort to it as well. But like you were saying, you were focusing on the comfort side because I mean, it was you were living on beaches for goodness sake.
Well, and in that case, it wasn't a dangerous comfort zone. It was a comfort zone that I could stay. I could have stayed at that level for ever and been very happy.
Mm.
I was making just enough money to get by. I'm living on the beach. Had my great gyms that I worked out. I had a lot of friends there. I grew up 70, I don't know, 50, 60 miles away from there. And so I'd settled into what would be a healthy lifestyle. And
Mm.
the I wouldn't have gone further than where I was at, but if it could have been sustainable, and it was something that I really did enjoy. So I was in my mind, I did not want to leave the island. I did not want to leave that area. I wanted my job in my mind there is to figure out a way to retire there.
So
And
what was the difference then? Because I mean, you know as well as I do, typically people when they're in a comfort zone, they stay there. It's very unusual for somebody to leave a comfort zone. And you had a really comfortable comfort zone. Yet somehow you keep referring to how you had only the one choice. How is that?
well, because the South Carolina opportunity is, the Florida facility was not making any money.
Mm,
And so if we would get a client or two, the expenses and the overhead. So it was like we were losing money, and I don't think we were talking about shutting down, but it was going to be basically you're going to have to go get a couple of other jobs.
okay.
And so again, I was still in the same position. It wasn't a living wage I was making, where South Carolina could possibly, and it did, turn into a living wage.
Mm,
So it was like I didn't really have much choice, because there wasn't enough money for Rick to make money and me to stay there and really get anything out of it. So that was sort of the catch 22 that I was in there, and it just and he was pressuring me pretty hard to go, because this was a lucrative opportunity for us to be in
mm,
South Carolina.
mm.
And uh, it's amazing how it worked out. I didn't like it, I said, for a while, but then I grew to love it. And it's funny because I could go back to Florida tomorrow and have that same lifestyle right now, and it's not the same island, and I'm not the same person.
That's an interesting point right there too. Let's talk about that because not necessarily we can talk about it in your particular context, but just in general, when we go through the crash and burn moments in life, you had a major crash and burn moment. I've had my own crash and burn moments, and they're painful, they're horrible to go through. You've actually convinced me. I don't know if I ever told you this because in the past, I would marvel at the fact that you look back on your crash and burn moment and said it was the best thing that ever happened. I'm actually at that point with my own now. I don't think I've told you that, but
No,
I'm looking back at my 2008 moment and at the moment of my divorce when my ex-wife left me. Those are my two crash and burn moments. I've actually gotten to the point where I'm grateful for them. Can you imagine me saying that, 10 years ago?
You never liked, you never, I'm not saying you didn't like my statement. You never understood my statement.
Right.
Yeah.
It seemed stupid. It seemed
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. But when you look at it from retrospect, again, in my case, the, I was working a job for my dad in the insurance agency that didn't work out. I hated
Mm,
that. That's when I developed a bad gambling problem. Then I went to, so I had to have something to bust me out of that. That gambling thing took over my life. I wasn't going to quit.
mm,
It was going to kill me or whatever. So things fell apart, and
mm.
it was that falling apart that made me rebuild. And it was, again, no way am I presenting this as, I don't want anybody to ever hear that everything fell apart and the first thing I said is, well, damn, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. No,
Yeah,
no,
that's not
no.
the way it goes.
No, it was retrospect that allowed me to be able to look back and say, wow, if that didn't happen, then this didn't happen. And, all those things had to happen for me to be sitting here. I'm in, Richmond, Virginia area, talking to you on my podcast. I have my own business. I'm financially secure. I'm in great health. None of that happens without all that other stuff happening. So you can't love your life and hate the experiences that gave you your life. You gotta reconcile that somehow.
Yeah, well, you try. I mean, because when you're first in that position of realizing that you do need to find a way to love your life, even if you haven't come to find a way to love the parts that you don't like, you still try. You're not necessarily succeeding, but you're trying to love it.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the point you're making is, in order to really, truly, deeply love it, you do actually have to get to a point where not only do you accept what you went through, but you recognize the value of it. That's the appreciation point.
And I do, and there might be a little nuance to this as well. When I say it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me, it changed my life. I don't think there's any point that I've ever said I loved what happened to me.
No,
I don't. I don't. I did not love jail. I
no.
promise you. I did not love the process. I did not love being homeless. I don't love eating out of a trash can. There's
Absolutely
none.
not.
None of that stuff is what I love. But I'm exceptionally grateful for every bit of it. And there's you can be grateful and not love it.
Yes, very important distinction, and I'm glad you
Yes.
brought that one out because it
Yeah.
is easy to confuse the two. It,
Yes.
well, I remember it was one of the biggest breakthrough moments for me in terms of my understanding because you and I we've been doing the show pretty much since my first year doing this, and I I can pretty much count on my hand the various points where I had my breakthrough moments where I realized I encountered an idea that I couldn't quite reconcile or that just didn't quite make sense or whatever. Now, the first one being law of attraction. That's how we ended up starting doing the LOA today. But later on, the idea of appreciating, a crash and burn moment. That's what you were alluding to earlier when you said it's not that I loved or hated it. It's just I didn't I couldn't imagine how you could actually appreciate something like that happening. And it was true. I couldn't figure out how could you possibly appreciate that. And it wasn't until I realized that appreciation really had nothing to do with liking. I mean, it took me a long time to come to that viewpoint. But once I finally grasped that appreciation has nothing to do with liking, then it's like all the cards came together, all the chips piled up just the way they're supposed to, everything lined up. Because that's the point that made the whole thing work. But boy, that's a tough one to grasp when you
It's
first
very
get
tough to grasp. It really is because it's counterintuitive to what it
completely.
most people would be. So, but when you look at what propels you, moves you forward, most of the gigantic companies at some point started with somebody who's disgruntled and started a company.
Mm,
Yeah, or didn't like what they were doing in the other company and started something similar but better or whatever. And so most people are put into situations to perform. The one of the big companies here in Richmond, Virginia is Dominion Energy. Great big company. Uh, I mean, employees. I don't know how many people in Richmond. Probably 10,000 people from Richmond.
mm,
Uh, Everybody makes really good money. All that, nothing wrong with it whatsoever. It's a good
hmm.
job. You can go put in your 30 years at Dominion, retire with a solid pension, considered
Yeah.
wealthy, all that. But also, is that the cost of that? A lot of people, that's a lot. That doesn't sound intriguing to me. I do like the idea of the money piece, being
Sure.
good. It's a nice thing, but 30 years at that place, most of the time you're not enjoying it. You pay the price. The what when we ask, when you look at somebody who you admire or even envy or appreciate what they've done, you asking what the cost they paid for that is a really important thing. So the idea that I can look at somebody who's been with Dominion Energy and they retire with a couple million dollars in stock and plenty of pension, all this other stuff. It's great, but that the price was 30 years of your life, really
Mhm.
not even being your life, because especially the early part, you're really low to middle, corporate structure is not fun. It's a lot of competition, it's a lot of backbiting, a lot of backstabbing. It's a stressful environment. So, the cost sometimes is not seen when people do things and they get there. So when somebody looks at me that doesn't know my story at all, they say, well, man, you are really lucky. You got this great job. You have plenty of money now. You have this going on. And I do. Those are true statements.
Sure.
But they don't know the cost of what that was. And that's what's missed a lot.
You're starting to touch on something that I realize is connected to what I'm now doing with Jody Lynn Craven. Now, Jody, I think I've told you, Jody Lynn and I have started a new podcast called Money, and we're focusing on a number of things associated not only with money itself, but what's going on currently with money and people's reactions and attitudes about money and so forth. She and I are preparing to do an episode where we're going to start exploring an alternative um, mo- an alternative way of understanding money. I'll leave it at that. I won't go into all the details of it. But one of the aspects of what we're going to dive into is tied to the idea of how value works. Now, in our society, most of what we measure of value has to do with its monetary value. That's the way the capitalistic system works. I mean, it's just built in that, and one of the key aspects is how prevalent or how rare is the thing involved. The more common it is, usually the lower price. The less common it is, the higher the price. That's typically the way it tends to work. And so we tend to value things that are more scarce, that are more rare, that are more unusual, and we value things less that are more common. One of the things that I'm going to develop with Jody Lynn is the idea that if with a new value system that she and I are going to talk about, we're going to appreciate more the stuff that tends to be valued less. We're going to value more, the basic things, the things that are, you referred to the cost that you pay, the price that you pay. Well, one of the costs that you can pay working for a company like Dominion is that it can have a negative effect perhaps on your family, or it can have a
Absolutely.
negative effect on your health. Those are things that you can't necessarily place a high dollar value on because that's not the way the monetary system values it. But nevertheless, it's still high value stuff. It's just a different value scale, if you will. It's a different way of measuring value, which is something we'll do in the Money podcast. And I think it's relevant here too, because the idea of appreciating something that doesn't necessarily have a high price tag on it is about shifting your value scale to a different
Sure.
scale.
Sure. And that matters. That matters a lot. And I know this guy down in Florida, and one of the bigger Lexus dealerships down there. He is the finance manager guy. So after you buy your car, you're the one that he sees and tries to sell you all this other crap, that they do. And he makes probably $700,000 a year.
Wow. Yeah.
He works really hard. And on the surface, it's like, man, that's fantastic.
Great money. Yep.
Great money. But first of all, he did not start at the Lexus dealership. He had to work his way up from, the other dealers. And then he wasn't in finance in the beginning. He had to do all that stuff. So it took a while to get there. But the cost of working the automobile industry, the big things like that is you need to be there 6, if not 7 days a week. You need to
Right.
be there at 9 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night.
Right.
So the my friend that I'm talking about, he has a ton of money. He also has a terrible relationship with his kids because he wasn't there their entire childhood.
Mhm.
He's divorced 2 times.
Yeah.
Is he has an alcohol problem,
Mhm.
and the cost of all of that was far higher than his compensation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the value of his using a value term, it's a negative value to that. But most people here, he makes $700,000 a year. Okay, that's good. But one of the things that I see this in some form or fashion posted frequently on the internet. If I were to walk up to you and say, Walt, I want to give you $10 million tonight, but you're going to die tomorrow,
Yeah.
you would be like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Mm,
So we know your life is worth more than $10 million to you. We know that.
that's right.
Yeah. So there's, but we don't see that the other way. And so within all the stuff that we do, understanding what value is, like what is a lot of money to the average? What would you say a lot of money is to the average person? I don't. Is it $1 million?
Look, it's an interesting question. And I mean, I'm not going to give a snap answer for a very good reason. It depends on who you're talking to. If
Yeah.
you're talking to somebody who's living on minimum wage, that's somebody like that, a $50,000 a year salary is a lot of money.
Sure.
Someone who's already making 75,000, 50,000 is a waste of their time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it depends on the person that you're talking to as to,
And
what a lot
and
of
that's
money
the
is.
point. That's the
Yeah.
point. Yeah. So in the orbit of people that I'm around, I think most people would agree. If you have $1 million, you've done okay.
So I would think,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
let's say 95% of the population would think that.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not what it used to be,
Hmm.
but it's substantial money. If you have a
It
million
is.
dollars,
Yeah.
you're good for a little while there for sure. Uh, so let's say most people would look to that. Well, there's other people that have $50 million. So $1 million to them
Nothing.
is an absurdly low number. But if you're working, at Dollar General and you're making $35,000 a year and you're trying to feed and clothe your kid, $1 million sounds like I mean, just wow.
That just sounds impossible, really.
Yeah, it's a number that you just couldn't possibly comprehend. So a
Hmm.
lot of it is where you're at, and that's what we get lost in translation a lot of times. And your perspective of things dictates the value. That the you remember the tulip controversy many like a long time ago. What was that
About
called? The Great Tulip, whatever.
the,
Where
the yeah, where tulips were actually sold as commodities, and
yeah,
the price of tulips got ridiculous. Yeah,
yeah.
it was roughly in the 1400s.
Yeah. This whole drama, people are saying the equivalent of thousands of dollars for one tulip, and
Right.
it, and tulips are just they're not rare, but yeah, they created this urgent, and then at somewhere along the way, somebody paid they paid all this money for a tulip, and then suddenly everybody's like, nah, they're not worth anything, and so it
Mm.
just the value has a lot to do with it. One of those things that were so popular, it's not cryptocurrency, but they're fungibles or something like that, non-fungible.
Well, cryptocurrency is based on the idea of a fungible, or to put it the other way, fungible is the concept that drives what a fungible is the same thing as what a cryptocurrency is stored in. It's essentially the same
Okay,
mechanism.
so I don't know exactly what was going on, but these stupid like something about an ape sold for millions of dollars.
Mm,
It's worth $1 now, whatever. It has zero value. It's just
yeah,
and there it never had value because I was trying to understand it. I do have some cryptocurrency, so I thought it was adjacent to cryptocurrency. So I thought maybe I would try to get into that. I can never understand. Nobody could. I had 100 people try to explain it to me,
by,
and it never made any sense where I would ever put any money in it.
by
And
the way, for good reason. I just wanted to say.
yeah. It never did make sense. And also Enron, for example, the company Enron that went out of
Mm,
business many years ago with all that stuff. Warren Buffett went to Enron because he wanted to see if he wanted to invest in it because their stock was going crazy. And he talked to 10 people and he said, nobody could explain to me what they did.
yeah,
He said they said a bunch of words, but I kept trying to tell them to break it down. Where is it at? And nobody could ever answer him. He said, "I will not invest in them." And less than 6 months later, they were done.
right.
Yeah, because it was so the value is perceived a lot of times. There's a lot going on, but as we started the show, the momentum of things, but your perspective, when you have a lot of money, your perspective of a lot of money is different. I often have told people, this is a true statement. There was a time in my life where $5 would be equivalent of 100,000 right now.
Mm.
Seriously, that sounds absurd.
Yeah.
Just getting my hands on $5 was probably harder than getting my hands on 100,000 right now.
Right. Yeah.
And
Well, you're
that's
reminding me of something. You once told me a story. And of course, you've told many stories to us here on the program, but you once told a story about a client you were working with. He was a billionaire client, and you've had a number of billionaire clients. And this particular one, you were having a conversation with him, and I don't remember exactly how it ended up, but somehow you and he were looking at the same desk at the same time. You must have been in the same room.
yeah.
Again, I don't know what the circumstances were, but at one point, he apparently looks down at the desk and he picks up a check that's on the desk. He says, "Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. It was a $17 million dividend check, and it
Yes.
meant nothing to him."
Nothing.
And when you told that story, that really stuck with me because it illustrated so beautifully the fact that, for somebody like me, $17 million would be like,
Oh,
"Oh my God, I can't believe that." But when you have billions, it means almost nothing. So the
well,
exact
yeah,
same 17 million.
yeah. And to me, and I remember that exactly because it's been several years ago, but it was under another piece of paper.
Mm.
And he said, "Oh, I forgot to." I don't know how many days it wasn't deposited, but every day that $17 million is not in the bank, you're losing a chunk of money. It's a
Oh
lot of money.
yeah.
And I'm like, well, do we need to go there right now and deposit this thing? Because I said, you're losing money. He laughed. He goes, it'll be the same money tomorrow. It's okay. Don't worry about it. But his position was, you're right. That check, if he didn't find the check, I'm sure somewhere along the way somebody would realize there's a
Mm.
$17 million check to get deposit. But it wasn't going to be because he was waiting for it or needed it.
Nope. 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 And because of that, that's one of the most fascinating things about value. You made the point beautifully when you asked the question, what do most people consider to be a lot of money? And we very quickly zeroed in on the fact that it depends on how much money you actually have access to determine that factor. But it also illustrates three people can look at the same pile of money and see three different things
Sure,
because
sure.
they're in different circumstances. And it's one of the most important ideas, I think, particularly in a time where there's so much concern about money, concern. People, more and more people are aware now than ever before of how manipulative the monetary system is, and the central banking system is, and so forth. It's gotten to the point now where, I mean, I wrote a book about it in 2008, and I wrote it because I didn't think anybody really understood any of it. And after reading my book, they still didn't understand it. But people are understanding it now. They're grasping that there's something messed up going on here. Well, the fact that they're recognizing that, I think, is a good thing. But what it's also pointing to is they're realizing that what they've been using as their measure of value isn't measuring value accurately for them anymore. I mean, they still think that a lot of money is a lot of money, but they're thinking about it differently. And I think that's a very healthy thing. It's not only a healthy thing, it's an indicator. It's an indicator that people are now going to start looking for other ways to value things, which
Yes.
is why I'm going to be doing that series with Jody Lynn. But I think that's such an important thing. When people start to value things differently from the way they had previously, that enables them to have new opportunities come up that didn't come up before. Actually, they probably did come up before, but they didn't recognize them because they didn't value it in the same way. But when they've switched their value system around, they start noticing things they didn't notice before.
Yeah.
They start appreciating things they didn't appreciate before. They start thinking about things differently from the way they thought about it before. So I would very strongly advocate anyone who's thought about reevaluating your values, do it. It's a good thing to do. You're going to gain perspective that you've never had before, and it's going to lead you to things that you never thought were possible.
The I met this guy. It's funny you say that because I had a similar conversation with. So I met this guy who he doesn't think he have a gambling problem, and it's not a traditional gambling problem if he
Mm.
does, right? So he probably makes, he's always did well, make good money. So starting back, I think in 2001, he started buying basically I don't know, $100 worth of Powerball and Mega Millions every week.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Same numbers. His theory was over time, he's destined to win.
Hmm.
I tried explaining to him over 13 million years, yes, but it's not going to be in your lifespan. So anyway, hell bent to do it. I think it was I tried to point it out to him the amount of money he was spending.
Hmm.
If you were to invest, he would have had well over $1 million if he'd taken that money back then and invested like I believe in investing and all that. But nonetheless, he didn't. We kept doing it. So I talked to him the other day, and he said, "I said, well, how did that work out for you?" And I said, "Did you have any big wins?" And he said, "One time I won $2,000." And he said, and I would often win 100, somewhere around there. But that's it. He said,
Hmm.
it's cost me a fortune.
Hmm.
Uh, he said, I realize how stupid it is right now. And he said, I stopped. He said, I just stopped. And
Good for him.
I said, good. And he said, I don't check the numbers because if the number did come up, one of my numbers came up, I'd probably kill myself. And I laughed. I said, well, let's hope not. But he had a belief system. He valued this concept, and it was a faulty belief system. He kept doing it, and just this year he stopped doing it. So for 25 years, he's doing at least a couple $100 a month. I mean, a week spread. That's a lot of money, and if you'd
It is.
invested it, and he said, I remember our conversation when you told me that, and he said, I just thought that luck or whatever, something would hit between now and then. And I said, no, it's just he had a belief system that was flawed, a concept that was flawed, and his refusal to give up on it cost him. Now he's fine. He's not in any danger financially. He's good, but he would have so much more if he had not done that.
Well, I would also argue that what he gained out of it was more valuable because he learned deeply. He, kind of the hard way, really. He set himself up, but he learned to value it differently. Before he had this value system that said, all I have to do is just hit that one number and I'm set for
Yeah,
life.
yeah,
And by realizing, first of all, through direct experience that very rarely works, but even more than that, realizing that he didn't want to stay there. He didn't
yeah.
want to stay in that value system. He wanted to switch his value system around. That to me is the great benefit that he got out of this. Yeah, it cost him all that money over the years, but look what he gained. He gained the perspective of what happens when you choose to change your value system.
Well, and that's the thing. A lot of people won't let go of the course they're on. And they especially when it's been proven faulty.
Mm.
But the sort of the warning I give everyone before I start talking about stuff like this is I am not a relationship therapist, so let's stay away with that. I
Fair
clearly
enough.
not. So, but one thing that I've always been fascinated about is there seems to be a cycle for many couples, not every couple, but they're married. They usually 10, 12 years into marriage. I see this number hit a lot. A couple kids there, and they decide they're going to get divorced.
Mm.
And they get divorced, and they usually get in really good shape. They go find new partners, and usually the second things might even be better than the first. But the idea that they they didn't look at the concept of what, first of all, we didn't ever talk about why we fell apart. We didn't ever talk about what happened. We didn't, they didn't do this, but it's just, when you keep making the same choice and then you repeat cycles, like we're not going to, we haven't had sex in 2 years. We're not communicating. We're not doing these things. And that stuff gets ignored, and then that's going to end. So there's a whole process. That marriage these two people were madly in love when they got
Mm.
married.
Mm.
They had their kids. What happened between that and this? And a lot happens. A lot of it's
Sure.
very common that it happens. That just the taking things for granted, not being able to. I believe every relationship falls apart because of lack of communication most of the time. Not every, but
I
most of the
agree.
time.
I agree.
uh, and you don't communicate, but then you're going to go find somebody else who got divorced from the same situation, and this time it's going to be different or better. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
wow. it's a weird fascination to sit back and watch. And relationships have a, valuing your relationship and what matters in a relationship is really important. And I think that's uh, I don't see a lot of happy couples. And again, I know that's my line of work, but there's very few marriages out there that I'm going, that's a great marriage. It's generally not. And I'm just fascinated by the repeated behavior, and yet nobody stops the behavior.
It's interesting because as you describe that, I'm thinking back to my relationship with my ex, with Louise, and most of our marriage was actually very good. We
Yeah,
were
you told me
together
that.
23 years. First 18 years or so were really good. First 17 for sure, and 18 was where she got really sick. So that's why I kind of make that the dividing line. After that, it started to fade, but those first years were really really good. So I knew what it was like to be in a great relationship. And for me, part of the confusion was what came afterward. But also, even though her leaving and the divorce happening and so forth were extraordinarily painful and very disorienting, I can now look back and say, wow, I can really appreciate the good parts of that relationship.
Sure.
I mean, probably even more than I did at the time, to be honest.
I'm
Not
sure.
that I
Yeah.
didn't, it's not like I didn't appreciate then because I did. But now I look back, I say, wow, that was really something. In fact, very shortly after the divorce, I went to a dance and saw a guy who I hadn't seen in, oh goodness, I'm going to say it was 25 years since I had last seen him. And we had a little chat, and I told him what had happened. And his only comment to me was, there are people who would give their lives for that experience. Now, bear
Yeah.
in mind, I had just been divorced. I had just
Yeah.
gone through all this pain. And his
Yeah.
comment was, there are people who would give their lives to have that experience.
Sure.
And he was right.
Yeah. It's very rare from, again, I always put that disclaimer on it because the line of work I do, have a tendency or bias towards seeing, most people don't show up to announce their happy marriage to me. So there's
Yeah,
usually some
it's
stuff
funny
going
how
on.
that works.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's how it works. But but just what you're saying, the idea that to me is rare, and to value that the fact, like you said, you valued it while it was happening, but valued it even more afterwards. Especially since you've been back, you dipped your toes in the dating realm, and you realize, whoa, it's we got lightning in a bottle. We captured it in a really good way for a long period of time, and that's, to me, that's what I get fascinated about is just you see the processes, you see the same redundant behaviors, and but yet the next step, how we started this whole thing, the next step would be, why don't we fix this? Why don't we work on the communication? So, when it does start to go, what stops us from doing that? What stops that from happening? It's a fascinating study, and also we talked about this recently. The much fewer people are getting married. There's much few,
Oh, yeah.
not many kids. I mean, the birth rate's going way down. Uh, I know with my clientele, my younger male clientele, they're really soured on dating. They don't really have an interest. It's just, they have various explanations of why, but it's just something. But sort of that group as a whole we'd rather just hang out, play our video games, do the stuff we do, and not have to deal with all that drama and stuff. So it's just this. I don't know where all that goes, but that's not a real sustainable way to keep things going.
Not really, no.
No, no,
But
no.
it is a way to once again have your own form
Yes,
of crash and burn, because crash and burn doesn't have to come through a relationship falling apart. It can come a lot of different ways.
sure.
It just means that your particular form is going to be a little bit different. That's all. The real trick is, no matter what the crash and burn is, no matter how it plays out, it's finding a way as soon as you can afterward, and it takes a while, but as soon as you can afterward, finding a way to identify what worked well and what you appreciate about the thing that happened. I mean, I say that having listened to you for the last 14 years talk about how you appreciated what you went through, and thinking to myself, you're absolutely nuts, Joel. Well, no, you weren't nuts. You were actually on the right thing. You were
Well,
actually talking about the
let's
right
not
thing.
get carried away. I was nuts, but that not because of that. Okay, not because of that. But that's exactly right. So but this gets back to, a lot of my beliefs nowadays are formed with stoicism in mind. The
Mm,
concept of, so I have a tendency to filter for what worked, what was good about it, what was the
right.
value of that, and I don't want to live any of that again. It was horrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote a Facebook post for those of you following me on Facebook, detailing just how bad that day was. So I don't sugarcoat it. It's not pretty, but that day was a turning point. That day is when I made a decision to take action. And to be honest, and I don't like to talk about this too often, but the other decision was 50-50. I could have gone the other way and ended it all there. So it wasn't without risk. But everything I have today is foundationally built on that day and that decision. And you can't. I love my life. I'm grateful for everything that I have today and all that led to it. But a lot of it I don't like. It was something that I just it was. There's no good way to spin going to jail or eating out of a trash can. There's no good spin on that. But there's good things that came from that. But the events themselves were never good.
Yeah, I think you just nailed it real well. I'll finish up our conversation today by pointing out that we started off today with no topic Monday. As usual, we found a topic.
Well, yes, yes, absolutely.
And that topic, I mean, there are a lot of different ways we could title it or summarize it. The way I'm going to summarize it is, no matter what's going on in your life, look at a new value system. Look at it,
I
look
like
at a
it.
new way of looking at it.
That's so much of your life is your perspective and how it's directed and what you're doing, what you tend to look for, what you choose to, who you choose to be around. All of these things are factors, and I'm always fascinated with people who something happens and they say, "I wish I could go back to what I had before." And that comes from not appreciating what you have in that moment. And that if there's one thing, the most powerful mindset that I can speak for me, and I think most people that live this way would understand it. The simple mindset of being grateful
Mhm.
is what gives you so much in life, because you're looking for the things to appreciate. You're looking for, I appreciate the things I appreciate. It isn't that I have a lot of money now. It's I have choices. I have a lot of good stuff going.
I think you've also identified probably that first step, because we talked a lot about first steps. You identified just now the first step toward finding that new value system,
Yeah, yeah, just
appreciating what
appreciate.
you have right now that you aren't giving enough appreciation to. That's how you start a new value system.
And some days it might, I look at it. I have a if I compare to where I've been in my life, I have a roof over my head, I have plenty of food, I have transportation, I have good health. Those weren't always the case for me.
Yeah, I'm
So it
glad they are
matters.
today. That's a
Yep.
wonderful thing.
Yes.
So, thank you very much. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody. Want to get your question answered here on the show? Just visit loatoday.net, and right at the top of the page, you'll see where you can upload a video or just type in a question, and your question will get answered here on the show. For more on this, listen to the entire podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.